Before we start today's roundtable, I want to give special thanks to Checkster, our group sponsor. Checkster has become well known in the recruiting industry by providing a platform that easily captures reference checks in the hiring process. I myself have been a customer of theirs for years. I use a reference checking tool for all of my new hires. However, Checkster has now released a new product suite called Insights. This new product suite is really what has excited me to have Checkster as the group sponsor. With Insights, the Checkster platform now covers employees from cradle to grave and not just reference checking, starting when they apply, going to offer, through onboarding, then covering their work at your company, and then to the end with exit interviews. It's an easy to use, easy to understand way of giving and getting feedback from your peers. Checkster's simple goal, to build more productive and passionate teams. Now, if this concept of getting insights from your peers regarding your work sounds familiar, it should, because that's the simple goal of this group. Connecting, communicating, collaborating. Support me, support the group. Follow the link below, recruiting.org/Checkster. This will take you to a landing page to sign up for a quick demo. If you are just thinking about automating your reference checking process, it'll be well worth your time. But I encourage you to check out the full Insights suite. I'd love to find out if you feel the way I feel about it. Now let's get to today's roundtable. All right, let's jump right into it. Thank you everybody for attending episode 80 in Let's Talk Recruiting, where peer practitioners in our TA industry all get together and talk about various topics in a roundtable session. Today, our topic of the day is ways to improve quality of hire, something I think everybody aspires to do with each candidate that they hire into their company. With us today, we have William Uranga out of the Phoenix area, Michael Lushitsky out of Boston, Khurshid Arani out of San Francisco, Mark Wolin out of the Dallas area, and Deborah Bamus also out of the San Francisco area. And myself, I am out of the Los Angeles area. Again, our topic of the day, ways to improve quality of hire. And William, how about we have you start off the conversation if we could?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is William Uranga. I'm with Spokio Incorporated. We're based out of Pasadena, although with remote these days, guess we can meet just about anywhere, it seems. So I'm here in the Phoenix Valley. I've been with the company a couple of years, and we are a vertical search engine dealing with digital identities. So we're at the cross of enormous amounts of data in petabytes, as well as dealing with identity management. So that's a little bit about us. From a quality of hire standpoint, I was just thinking, had jotted a few notes to myself, and really, anytime you're going to talk about quality, you need to make sure you think about the entire system. So you need to think about how do we measure quality from a candidate or a person standpoint. You need to be able to measure quality from a process standpoint. And then ultimately, I guess where the rubber really meets the road is we care about quality in the performance of the person that we select for the role and how they perform in our new organization. And you better have definitions for all those, otherwise it's going to go a far afield and start to talk about, well, I feel, or it seems, and you run away from all the possible objective quantification possible. So certainly having that in measurement of how you interview people, how you pick people, whether or not you're doing a fair amount across all three types of channels. And for us, we think about sourcing, we think about posting, we think about referrals as those main channels. From interviewing, certainly goes to training and being consistent in our questions. We use Confluence as a way of capturing questions so that we're consistent in whoever has a focus area asking those same set of questions each time. And what we've not done as good of a job, but I'm looking to take that on in this coming 2021, can hardly wait for that year to get started, let me tell you, is tying it to their performance review, their first and maybe second performance review, as evidence of how well we did in picking the right person for the role, for the culture, and so forth. And one of the things that we have in the performance reviews is simply a 9-box system. And so we're looking at that as a real simple way to see what the score is, how well did they score in the selection process, and kind of developing a trend there as a way of tying off quality in the performance side of things. So that's what we're looking at. Certainly involves alignment. There's lots of different ideas about how to measure quality, and I know my colleagues here are going to illustrate those differences very well. And other than that, picking out those things, it needs to be consistent in measuring it and tracking change. I'd probably suggest at least quarter over quarter, if not month to month in those areas.
So William, can I ask a question? So you tie your recruiting team's performance evaluations to the quality of hire? Is that how I understood that?
So yes, but not on those terms specifically. We do the quality of hire for the recruiters that are tied. We tie it to the conversion of how many do they present to the hiring manager, pass the hiring manager screen, and go on to the on-site. That for them, which is more into their area of control, they select, they initially screen, and then they elect to pass on. Is their quality control. The stuff I was mentioning earlier, as far as the process, as far as the vetting, as far as performance, that's much more at a meta level. So that's a little bit more me talking with HR and with the executive team to measure that. That's a great question. How do you measure it? How do you get your individual team members to care about quality? I mean, they should. It shows up in all kinds of different ways. But when it comes to quality of the candidate, yes, I look for great alignment between them and the hiring manager, and then ultimately, because it goes to on-site with the selection team, the interview team as well.
William, question for you around your knowing the objectives of the person once they get hired on, right? I think you call them the OKR. That's objective and key results, right? Objective and key.
Yeah,
results.
or KPIs. They've got a couple different nomenclatures there, I'm sure. Yeah.
Do you store that? And let's use a use case example of you're doing a backfill. Right? So this position already exists. You know what's needed of it. Do you store the KPIs or OKRs, whatever you want to call it, kind of like a library up against a position, or in your ATS, like a library of job descriptions? So it's not like you're recreating the wheel every time?
Yes, we have a job library. We have the Google Drive, so we keep that. It is shown as far as part of what we have the sections in a job description, really simple responsibilities, which include deliverables, KPIs, OKRs, however you want to put it, and then requirements in order to be able to demonstrate that you should be able to hit those responsibilities. And so, yes, we have the last one, whether you're talking about Confluence and how we organize the interview team, we have the last hire that we did set up that Confluence page or the job description. The problem is not the problem. It could be much more dynamic in the sense that you could have needs of the organization change. For example, I've got a director of data analytics role that's opened up. The person prior, we could not settle for somebody not to be technical as some of the data scientists that we had in the team. The reason for that was we needed somebody to be able to build into the organization some capabilities and tools to be able to deliver stuff downstream. That person has moved on, and now we're looking for another one, a director, another replacement, but they don't need to be as technical this time. They need to be a little bit more tuned into the different business needs that we have, because we're not going to be asking them to implement technically some of these tools and processes. They just need to be able to manage them. So different expectations require a little bit different descriptions, which is always a good thing. I'm sure my colleagues do this and are trying to make sure their teams do it. Is always to calibrate what this role we need for, because the targets can change versus the prior one if it's a backfill.
That story of the position, is that just in the recruiter's head, or is that kind of noted somewhere?
The position the recruiters had, you lost me a little bit. Sorry.
So you just you got into some details of the story of this position. Okay, the last person was X, Y, and Z. Now we need to do ABC.
That was actually a conversation that I had. I'm actually running that search, by the way. If anybody knows anybody, I'll happily talk to you. But seriously, the hiring manager was the CTO, and we had that conversation. So I said, so what? One of the first questions I asked was, what are we looking for differently in this person than the incumbent? And they had to think about that. But when they came back to me, a day or so later, not only the requirements changed, but the interview team's going to change as well. So there's all kinds of downstream effects that can happen from that. Because they're not going to be as technical, I don't need to have the VP of data operations or the head of data engineering involved in that conversation, which was significantly different than the last time we did it.
Yeah, Sean, I liked your question because I wonder that too. I know that when we hire, sometimes we edit the job description or we change it a little bit. So then, 6 months or a year down the road, we go back and it's a different job description than when we hired this person 6 months ago. So, like, I haven't figured out a good way to track that yet because we're reusing these job descriptions and just editing them. So, open to suggestions there on how to
So
track that.
when we have, assuming this is not a high fill rate or a high what do you call it? A high volume, high
volume.
role, which you're having to hire a bunch of people. I think that's a different environment. If you have more of these one-offs, I think one of the first questions is how is this different from the person what do we need to address different in that? And I've tried to make sure that's one of the standard questions my recruiters ask as well, because there's nothing worse, as we know, to find out some information 3 months into a search that would have been really helpful at the front end as far as where we were searching, the questions we were using the screen and everything else. And even the interview team, because if you have the wrong people in the room, that candidate as a patient could die on the table because nobody can agree what to solve or what to address.
William, one last question around the track backing or backtracking, going from candidate to hire, right, and then to measuring their performance on the job. I think job performance is kind of a beast in and of itself. But is the 9-box kind of your correlation? Are you like, let's say we're a year down the road and everything's working, and you look at somebody's 9-box score. Is it literally just you're looking at that score in their HRS or whatever format it's in, and looking back to your recruiting notes? And what I'm really getting to is how do we connect that recruiting process and the knowledge that we gained and kind of predicted when we hired them to that downstream information? Or are we just handing the baton off to HR and it's up to them as a recruiting team? And this kind of goes for all panels. I don't want to put you on the spot.
But no, that's a great question. It's a logical, so what do you do with information? I am looking to have it particularly presented to the executive team of here's the people we said yes to ultimately. And in our case, I'm not sure about everybody else here. It's not purely consensus driven in the sense it's up to the hiring manager as the customer and their executive to say yes, and let's go to offer. The input, though, that they get from the interview team members, I think is an interesting thing to review. How many people were excited to have them on? How many were questioning it? How certain were you in making the hire at that point in time? And then now what was the score that you gave them based on their performance? And then I think tying that back to the interview team that picked them, the certainty of the hiring manager, and then looking back, how do we come across this person? And assuming they're good, and how do I clone the heck out of this? Because I need to repeat this in this department. I need to duplicate this in a higher volume or a different location or whatever it is, and back into that. And actually, I'd say I'd certainly would give the recruiter or sourcer a pat on the back, saying, "Awesome job! This is somebody that the company really values." And we not only said yes, and as did they, but look, they're doing a great impact here at work at the job. So I think that's kind of a nice affirmation that probably recruiters don't get enough of these days.
Yeah, one of the quickest ways I've seen, just from a reporting perspective, to give that kudos is when you look at a lot of systems or companies will track source of hire into the HRS. So when that source is direct sourced or recruiter source or what have you, and they hit that 1-year anniversary, that's just sort of like an easy report to do to say, great find, great hire. Mm-hmm. But let me ask you a question, sort of what you just said there around the backstory and how you found them. So most sources, when you say source of hire, you think the job board that they apply to or the career site. I always thought the source of hire was really the company they came from or the direct experiences that they had was my sort of source of hire. Looking at determining good quality candidates, are we looking at their previous company or say their last 2 previous companies as sort of, there's my sources, those are what I need to get to? Or is that just sort
Absolutely.
of take it for what it comes from? Michael?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm sure a lot of you could agree from a technology standpoint. We want to look at best in class. For Kubernetes, for instance, at VMware and Capital One, they have really good shops. So I hate to say it, but they produce a lot of great people. So we try to go dig into those companies and candidates and potentially have that background, because we know that they come from great companies.
Yeah, and I think hopefully you have some type of tools in regards to pipelining of candidates. And so even if it's just through LinkedIn Recruiter with the project folders, we have a tool called Avature that we use for candidate pipelining. So if you've run successful searches in the past, and even if you're not there at the company anymore, the company can backtrack what you targeted in the past in that successful search.
I'll be quick to note, as much as there are things that are good examples, there are people that have had terrible experiences at otherwise well-noted companies. I'll never forget, I was at a startup where the fellow was the VP of engineering and had, I think his prior experience was at Amazon, and just hated it. I mean, nothing personal against the individual. It just was not a good environment for him, and he left. And now he's, VP of this startup. He's moved on since then. Did exceptionally well, very thoughtful, and performed well beyond anything what the executives were expecting of him. So it can be that people are simply in the wrong place at the wrong time as well. So
Yeah, I would say great consumer brand does not equal great employees. So I have some stories kind of under that regard too. I won't name any names. All right, excellent. Michael, how about we continue with you and jump over to you? Thanks, William.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Leszewski, recruiter with Wayfair out of Boston. So I support their infrastructure and platform engineering recruitment. So quality of hire, I feel like organizations always ask this question. So I feel like it's one of those metrics where it is hard to measure, obviously. So, but I would say, when you're digging into a new search, whether it's a backfill or an actual net new hire, it's like you always want to have the intake session and set expectations with the hiring manager. Like, what do you need for this position? What does the position entail? What kind of talent pools are we looking at? Are we bringing in a few people, or is this going to be a high volume fill? Tell me a little bit more about what that looks like. Because we want to make sure we can tee up the expectations and the landscape for the prospective candidates, because we want to make sure that they have a very one, enjoyable hiring experience, but two, setting them up for success. Like, hey, this role was as advertised. It's not, throwing you into something that 6 months down the road you leave and then, we're back to square one. So, I like William's point, ensuring alignment with, not just your hiring managers, but also your stakeholders as well. So talent acquisition or HR VPs, kind of depending where you're at, and kind of maintaining those OKRs as well. So,
Michael, as a recruiter, do you follow up directly with your candidates that you hired into the company, where you say, hey, this is the message I gave to you as we were hiring you. It's now 30, 60, 90 days or what have you. Do you directly follow up with your hires, let's call them that? Hey, did I deliver the correct message now that you've been here? Do you do direct follow-up?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I would say 90% of the time I do. There's always a one-off where, I either get too busy or what have you, but I always like to do a 30, 60, and 90-day check-in. And it could just be as simple as sending a Slack message like, hey, how are things going? I'd love to, and especially now we can't go grab coffee like I normally would because we're in COVID, but you normally would like to, meet up for 30 minutes, grab coffee or beer, kind of depending on what kind of day it is, but and just talk, hey, how are things going? And especially with us, our teams are fundamentally smaller. So it's like, I can like, hey, how are things going with Jordan or Steve, or for instance, who are their new managers, and can usually get some intel too. It's like, oh, there might be a search coming our way. It's like, oh, we just had a data solutions manager leave. So it's typically what comes out of that.
Yeah, I've always done a 30, 60, 90 in the past. With the acquisition of Pandora last year, they again had a little bit more forward-thinking HR team. They have an employee experience group overall. So now that responsibility actually falls within their purview, so that they follow up with the HR VP, the manager, as well as the new employee, to make sure that they had a good onboarding experience and it's met their expectations.
We do that as well. We have the verbal conversations. Actually want the team to have that, to keep contact and actually network with the people that they brought in. But we also send out 30, 60, 90 and 1 year through Bamboo, which is our HR platform. So they get a survey. The hiring manager gets a survey as well. Is this employee what you expected? Would you hire them again, knowing what you know now that you've worked with them for whatever number of days? very telling, because it's not anonymous, but it's a little bit more like people tend to be very open, where when you're having coffee with them, they might not be that as much.
Exactly.
You're like, yeah, everything's great, but they're going to fill out the form to say it's not great. My manager is, whatever. So, we get really good feedback from that.
It's a good way of assessing both ways, right? Is the manager happy with the candidate? Is the candidate happy with the manager? So I think 30, 60, 90 is really important for any organization.
Do we
I
ever,
think too, oh, sorry, Sean, go ahead.
this is sort of follow up to yours, Michael. So I always kind of looked at that not as just only a gauge of the candidate's quality, but also as a gauge of the hiring manager to basically tell me what you're looking for. Did we hit it right? So if the candidates come back, oh, it's not what I thought, and that's a common occurrence. Well, the issue may not be with the candidate quality, it's kind of the hiring manager quality and their ability to define what they're looking for. Does anybody kind of gauge it in that? It's kind of like a backdoor way to gauge your relationship with the manager. But to me, that was always a tell. If I got a manager who's, I get good reviews, great, we're on point with what he's looking for, versus the manager of, well, I'm not really sure what I'm looking for, but I'll know it when I see it, right? That's kind of the other end of the stick of it.
It's like, well, when they throw that question out there, usually it's like, all right, well, we'll revisit this when you're ready to hire. So,
yeah.
Anybody that says, I'm not sure what I'm looking for, stop the search. Stop.
Yeah, it'll be a big waste of time.
No good will come from that.
None.
So, William, you say that easily. I think somebody with your experience and position is going to do that.
There's a nice way to put it, but yes. Well, I think there's a couple things. Yes, you could have somebody that's been a hiring manager that's been burned before, or a new hiring manager that doesn't have confidence. I think sussing that out is one thing, but if you don't have somebody clear on what they're looking for and how to measure it, if you haven't walked that through with them, then they're going to be all over the place. They'll take feedback and get swayed by it, as opposed to assimilating it for what they need. It will, they'll ask you to delay putting the offer out to the candidate while you look at other candidates, and then you'll probably lose that candidate. I've seen that happen so many times. I'm sure we all have, because candidates are very intuitive, and they'll pick up when you're not sure what you want. And the moment that is, then, hey, if you don't know what you want, you can't tell whether I'm in or out. The good people will go elsewhere where there's certainty. And so that really starts with the description, and so we start with that, with the description, and sometimes it's a longer document with all kinds of stuff that they need for the role and the context. But by the time you put together the interview team, if they're not sure what they're willing to trade off for, or more specifically what they're looking for, and then what they're willing to trade off for to get it, with the interview team manager, that is a cluster, waiting to happen, because you not only have hiring manager not certain, now you have interview team members that are going to look at the elephant all kinds of different ways and tell you different things, and the debrief that you have after that on site is just going to be bad.
So with a couple things to that, what we do is when we're interviewing a candidate, we're starting to go through the process, and we've selected the interview team. We'll send out a message to everyone, CC everyone that's part of it, and say, here's the areas that we want you to focus on. This is your area of focus. This is your area. This is your area. And that way everyone's very clear, very succinct. We send a job description on what they need to be looking for. And then when we go to the debrief, we'll usually get everyone on a call just like this. I don't let the hiring manager talk. Like, they have to be quiet, because they will influence people by what they say. I want the team to feel like they can talk, and I want the hiring manager to just listen and not be influenced. I also have our ATS where no one can read the interview feedback until they've completed their own. And I encourage them to not talk amongst themselves prior, like, when they grab a resume and they're heading into a conference room back in the old days, and they would stop by someone's desk. What'd you think? What'd you think? Like, highly discouraged.
Plus one, what Deborah just said, anytime you corrupt other people's input, you're not helping yourself at all. And that it was just brought to my attention. We actually use Slack during the day of the interview as a way of people that are meeting with the candidate, the on-site, the video version, of who's on time, what questions didn't get asked. And we had co-opted that a little bit to gather summary feedback as a way of letting some of our execs know whether we were going to call them in or not to meet with a candidate. Well, somebody pointed out and said, well, you're coloring some of our opinions before we even get in there with the rest, some of the other interview team members. Like, oh my goodness, that's true. Here we're telling them not to, prejudice feedback. So we're having to make sure that we take that out and don't try to use Slack for everything on the interview day, but for what its intentional purposes. Otherwise, yeah, we're just coloring feedback, and that's not good before a debrief, to Deborah's point.
Mm-hmm.
Deborah, what ATS do you use that you can do that you can have? I'm assuming it's a setting.
Yeah, we use Lever, but I think that you can do it in Jobvite and Greenhouse as well.
It's becoming standard.
Yeah, I do think so. Yes. Yeah. I even ask our recruiting coordinator to not give feedback, because the coordinators, they have a lot of interaction. They see the candidate on a way different level than the interviewers or we do. Mm-hmm. So I always tell them, if you see something, you bring it to me, not necessarily the hiring manager, so we can discuss it, because again, I don't want to create any bias there.
Got it. Excellent.
But their feedback is really helpful, as is the office manager when they come into the office, or the receptionist or whoever. How do they check in? What do they look like? Were they courteous to you? For me, those are all key indicators of quality of hire, from first contact to very last contact throughout the whole process.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you for that, Khursheed, and thank you, Michael. Khursheed, let's jump over to you and your items.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Khursheed Irani. I work for a company called C Prime. We are based out of San Mateo in California. Just to give you a little bit more information about C Prime, we are America's largest agile training institution. Just to give you an idea, we've trained around more than 60,000 people just in Scrum in the last 10 years. I've been with the company this is my 11th year. Really enjoy doing recruiting. I do recruiting for a lot of companies in the Bay Area. It's fun and I enjoy it. And let's talk about the ways of quality hire. That's really important for us as recruiters, right? Because when we think about hire, right, and we think about our day-to-day job, right, there are more than 10, 15 recs usually on our table. And sometimes it's like, do I look at quantity or do I look at quality? That becomes a big question for us. But definitely quality is really, really important. And how can you improve the quality of the hire is when you look at the job description, right? What I do is I like to have a conversation with the hiring manager, sit down, have a conversation with the hiring manager. What is it? And that's what even Michael talked about, right? Intake conversation. It's important, right? Because there are sometimes, don't touch these companies, look at people from these companies, right? We see a lot of that happening, also, I want this person to be like Mr. X of my organization. What does Mr. X look like? Go to the LinkedIn profile, look at what Mr. X looks like. What is his background? What is his education? Where does he come from? Also, sometimes keyword searches are important, right? Because what you might think of for the requirement, but the manager is thinking something different. So sitting, doing that intake session, learning all that you know about the requirement before going to even start looking at the requirement, that's really, really, really important to be able to get even the first quality person. The second thing I like to focus on is spending quality time with my candidates, and that's what I always tell even my team members. If you get on a call with a candidate, conversations lead to great relationships. Candidate X you might be spending 20 or 30 minutes with might not be the right candidate for your current need, but there's always pipeline building, right? We all do that, in an organization. Not good for X, maybe good for position number Y. So that's really, really important as well. Sometimes managers look at purple unicorns. We all face this as recruiters, right? I want Mr. X with this quality, this quality, this quality. Are we able to find those people? The answer is no. They don't exist. And we have to even let our hiring managers know about that, and not just that, right? When you're looking at a resume or when you're talking to that person, spending quality time with that person, You understand that person's needs, and some people are go-getters. They might not be the exact fit for position number X, but it depends on us as recruiters to convince the hiring manager this is a great candidate. You might not see him exact fit on paper, but talk to him, figure out why he's a good fit. And the last thing that I'd like to talk about is organizational fit. And I know we keep talking about culture of the organization as well, right? Culture is very important because sometimes people can look great on paper, they can be great in conversations, but when they go in and work for the organization, we realize, oh my God, in the first 10 days, what a bad candidate I have selected for my job, because we didn't do our informal meetups, as Michael said, right? Meeting, and this is what I like to do. Sometimes when I feel, okay, this candidate is going towards the last stage of interviews, and again, this is COVID right now and we can't go out, but I do like to grab a cup of coffee with the candidate. What is it that attracted you towards the organization? Why do you want to come here? Those are some important questions that you ask, because and from the answers, because it's a judgmental call at the end of the day as a recruiter, right? Is this person going to stay or no? And retention is important. A company is spending thousands of dollars, right, to get this candidate in, but if he leaves in 30 days, money lost, right? Time lost, effort lost, money lost, right? So it's important that you get to know the candidate as well. And I'd like to cite an example with one company that I worked with some time ago, Zappos. And I really, really love their culture. The reason why is when you walk into that organization, like you say, I get selected at Zappos, right, today, and I go to work with them, I do the immersion training with them. Within the first 1 to 2 weeks, Zappos actually gives you an offer, and that's the offer to quit. I don't know how many of you have heard of that, but they put $2,000 in front of you and say, here's an offer to quit, and they'll pay you for how many days you worked for and plus $2,000. People who take that offer, not the right fit for the organization, right? So there are a lot of checks, and obviously there are post hire checks as well that we just talked about, the 30, 60, 90 day, where the candidate tells you about the organization, the manager tells you about the candidate. But as recruiters, right, we need to make sure that, the people that we bring in front of the organization, the candidates that we bring in front of the organization are the right candidates, because retention is important, especially in Silicon Valley, where we're living right now. People jump jobs, you get $10,000 more, boom, jump. You get 20, oh, somebody gave me stock options. Oh, this is a pre-IPO, let's jump, So people are jumping all the time. How do you retain talent? I'm sure this can be another conversation, right? How do you retain talent? But how do you bring in the right people that will not look out, will be happy within the organization, will be happy working for you. And they are here because they want to be here. That's the key takeaway.
Let me ask you a question around, like, typically when we talk about quality of hires, typically around skill sets or job performance, but around culture. And I don't want to say culture fix. I know there's a lot of conversation around, is that even the right thing to do? But I don't know what else to call it. But how do we kind of gauge, hey, from a personality perspective, how well is the quality of this? I'm just going to call it fit because I have no idea what else to call it. So then we kind of get into the personality and how they handle this type of work environment that's at this company or maybe specific to a team. Besides looking at, years experience and whether you test it out on a code testing or things like that, what are ways to kind of determine that, hey, is this going to be a right quality around working with others, for lack of better words? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I like Deborah's point of view, right? She said from the time the person walks into the office, right? How did he greet the receptionist? Like just those are important things, right? It's your dressing sense as well, right? I had somebody who wore actually dark yellow shoes and came for an interview, right? Not that, I want to discriminate based on that, but there is a dressing sense, right? So those are important things. Somebody who's not courteous, right, to a fellow member in the elevator, for example, right? Do I want to hire that person? That person's not going to be a good team member. So being a team player, and in any organization, right, with any people that you work with, we all work in teams. There's very few people who are individual contributors, right? It's all about team and team effort. And if somebody doesn't get along or doesn't have the basics, of being with a team, I don't think that's a quality hire for me.
I agree. So my role in the hiring process globally is I have a conversation just a conversation with probably 90% of the people that we hire globally. And I just get on a video call, I schedule 30 minutes and we talk. There's no agenda, we just talk. And sometimes I'm quiet during the conversation and people fill quietness with words. And you can learn a lot when you don't say anything. And then I just talk to the person and I gain so much because they're not in their interview mode, right? They're more in their just, this is who I am as a person mode. And I've learned some really great things about people. And I've learned some things that were a little bit head scratchers about people to know if they're going to be a fit for our team.
I just to reiterate, I recently, just last week, I spoke to somebody for a position, and the guy couldn't stop blabbering and telling me how great he was and how good it would be to hire him. And I said, I obviously think, yeah, you're great, right? And then when I hung up the call, I'm like, man, the hiring manager is going to ask me, why did I even send this guy if I ever send him? So the answer is no. I'm not going to even shortlist you for the interview. So
actually, Krishi, it sounds like that person belongs in PR, maybe not in engineering.
Definitely not in engineering. So it's and again, it's the time that you spend, right? You're engaging in that conversation. If you don't do that, if you talk to somebody for 10-15 minutes, you're not going to gauge that, right? Sometimes people might be awesome on the phone, but when I've met them in person, I'm like, ooh, no ways, this one's not going to be a fit, right? So getting to know people, I think really, really helps. And and I work with a lot of companies, right? So for me, it's a good way to assess because every company culture is different. So somebody who might be a great fit for A might not be a great fit for B, So it just depends, like, where do I send Mr. Y, that's what it is. So gauging, I think as a recruiter, right, when you have that experience, you've talked to so many people, right? Sometimes that judgment call is so important, and I think that really helps. And hiring managers do understand and appreciate us, but as I said, sometimes their expectations are really, really high, and you need to bring them down to earth, and you need to let them know the guy that you're trying to hire, we'll need 3 people to do this job, not 1. But that's again, it's the recruiters who need to do that, right? If we don't do that, then their expectations will always be like this.
The fit aspect too can be also handled from a company value standpoint. And it isn't so much whether the candidate can quote all of them to you, but it's how they, whether they agree with them or not, or have they thought about them or not. And so we're trying to do a better job as to having somebody, particularly at the on-site stage, champion at least talking about a couple of those. And we haven't decided whether, tell me a time or place where you've seen this value, or what do you think about this value? But having that conversation around kind of how we operate and why we operate that way is almost as important as the role itself to it, Krishi was saying. Spending quality time with the candidate, I think one of the things I've really worked with my team on, the recruiters, is to, even after the debrief meeting, which we tell the candidate, hey, we picked you, we still spend probably about 45 minutes setting up the offer conversation. And part of that's really trying to build trust with the candidate to tell us what they want, and trust that we'll tell them in response whether or not we're able to give it to them or not, as far as the terms or what have you. That's kind of a real point of test of the engagement of the relationship. But we spend probably about a good 45 minutes setting up that conversation in detail. And we tell them that we're going to take that kind of time because we figured, we do this as recruiters, every week, every other week at least for offers. This is maybe once every couple of years for a person. This is not at all something that they're comfortable or used to. So
right.
Yeah, and I feel candidates follow recruiters as well, right? It's especially in the Valley, right? If I move jobs, I'm sure my candidates who are with me, they'll want to move with, or they might want to know, hey, what are you doing at company Y? What is it all about? So if you have that rapport and that relationship, right, with the candidate is yours for lifelong, right? So that's important as well. You build rapport, you build relationships.
Yeah.
Question. Go ahead, Deborah.
If we've got the candidate, we've taken them through the interview process, technically they're sound, educationally they've got what we need, we'll schedule like a coffee conversation with the team. Like it's a team meeting, and they like I do, they will just get on and have coffee and chat and make sure that there is that team camaraderie and they're not dominating or they're not too passive, they're not argumentative, whatever, in just a very casual conversation. Because eventually everyone's going to go back to an office and this person's going to be sitting together with somebody, right? So we need to make sure that that's a fit. So that's kind of our workaround with COVID on not bringing people into the office and actually seeing them, seeing their yellow shoes or, whatever.
I think yellow shoes is going to stick as a tag.
It's stuck with me for the past 10 years.
Quick question before we move on to Mark. Kind of perhaps for the high volume recs, or if you simply don't have the time, do any of your companies use personality assessments in your hiring process?
Nope.
In the past, I did, but not in the last 6-7 years, probably.
Yeah, and I find that interesting. Typically, if you do take one, it's as an employee. And I always thought, why did you give this to me after I'm 30 days here? Why don't you give it to me before I got hired so you would know a little bit more? That's just sort of my personal preference. All right, Mark, let's jump over to you.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate everyone's time. I'm Mark Wallen. I work at SiriusXM in Pandora. I've been here. It'll be 10 years in January. And I focus on engineering, IT, anything tech really across the enterprise, and both an individual contributor as well as a management level. So I think my point has been touched on in various areas, but I think on a whole, like specific to Khurshid's points, I think that having the dialogue up front is very important, not only from a relationship perspective, but a lot of recruiters, they'll try and just check a certain amount of boxes and then they'll submit it to their managers and they feel like they've done their due diligence. If you don't have in-depth discussions around how they've used things, why they've used things, the decision-making process, they may end up getting the offer, but you really want the people that have more of a holistic view of what they've been working on. That can definitely impact the quality of hire. It's definitely a demonstrator that if they're able to talk a little bit more about their background and what they've been able to do, they're more likely to succeed once they do have the job. Obviously, there are going to be positions where maybe that's not required, so it's not going to be a candidate by candidate basis. So I think I'm just touching on a couple other points, that having that upfront dialogue and enough substantive information, I think that impacts the quality of the hire quite a bit as well.
So Mark, that information that you glean from those conversations with the candidates, right? And to your point, not all recruiters are created equal. Some get more into it than others. The information that you gather, how and when are you delivering that back to the hiring team? Is it upon submittal? Is it upon a debrief? How do you share the intelligence that you've sort of gathered?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to my agency days at Robert Half. I like to send a most placeable candidate email with a in-depth summary of what we discussed from a high level. Of course, not question by question. I don't like that approach myself. But just to give enough substantive feedback that a lot of their upfront questions are going to be answered. And if there was anything interesting that I learned, I'm sharing that upfront as well.
So kind of like right along submittal, you're getting that information to them?
Yep. I definitely send it all up front, and that I think gives a bigger picture to the manager about who they might be speaking with. And I mean, to your point, it depends on the recruiter. So I'm pretty technical for a recruiter. I can call back on statements that a candidate might give me as it relates to most technologies. And if I can present that information to the manager, it may save us an interview.
Yeah, I've seen like the total opposites where recruiters, like they hit the check boxes. To your point, we'd like to schedule an interview. We'll include the scheduling coordinator, and that's kind of the next step, versus a 2-page summary of the candidate. And it like blew my mind, the recruiter that did it. I'm like, wow, that's somebody who's really good and can get it out, right? So it's like the difference maker between recruiters. So
yeah, I think it's a happy balance. I mean, I like to be concise, but provide enough information that they come away with a feeling about who they know they're going to be speaking with. So I fully understand for some levels of position, maybe it's an executive vice president. I'll do a little bit more elaborate summary about their background, where they've come from. But I usually try to keep it to just a few paragraphs so that I know that the manager is actually going to read it.
Got it. So for all the panelists, how are you distributing kind of your expertise in interviewing people to your hiring team, and kind of bringing in, Deborah, what you talked about, where you don't want to skew other people's, feelings or their intuitions or what have you. How are you delivering your analysis of the candidate to your hiring team?
Well, so for us, once a recruiter has done the initial couple screens and they're ready to move it on to the hiring manager for review, we have weekly one-on-one candidate review sessions with our hiring managers. And that's when the recruiter presents the profile and they have to speak to it. They have to make their case for why the hiring manager should take 45 minutes, an hour out of their day to talk to this candidate. So there's been typically multiple conversations to get to that point where the recruiter has a really good comfort level on the candidate skill set and what they would bring to us. Very, very, very seldomly are we going to send a profile in an email with a written summary.
Okay. Anybody else?
Typically, so I typically write up a presentation, which usually is no more than 7, 8 bullet points of why, not just what this person's experience is, but how are they a fit for the position. And then, I tag that together, or put it together rather, and send it to the hiring manager. But this is after they pass an assessment that we've given them. And this is based on their Linux and Bash backgrounds. And that's just more specifically for the roles that I recruit for. So as long as they get above a certain percentage, we put that all together and send it over to the hiring manager for review. But typically, we sync up with them on a weekly basis as well. So very close to what Deborah's process is. So it's like we can stay very, very close to it.
Got it. Excellent.
Yeah, I would say it's certainly getting to that point of a mind meld level of trust with your hiring manager about what are they expecting to be the bar for worth their time to invest. Sometimes hiring managers keep it pretty wide. Sometimes it's that they're pretty specific about what they work, but we have that set up as a card of questions. Usually, about first 9 or 10 are pretty basic around motivation and interest and availability and other things like that. And then the last 4 or 5 are pretty technical as far as qualifying them for the role that the hiring manager wants to see some sort of evidence of. And usually after maybe a couple of sessions, a couple of candidates of calibrating with the hiring manager on results of actual candidates, I look for the recruiters to have picked up on what's in or what's out, and agree with the hiring manager. Is it 4 out of 5? Is it 5 out of 5? If the candidate gets right, then we make it automatic that they move on. Because what we don't want to have happen is they sit in the box saying, "No, just haven't had time." And right now for us, time is a killer. So the bias is action. If they're not sure, then we need to make sure that we get more information. So the next stage is going to get that information. And believe me, as I think what Deborah's mentioning, hiring managers do not want to waste their time. And I think after 1 or 2 of those, they pick up pretty quick about reviewing stuff and calling and adjusting as it should be. But we have usually for the first round with the hiring manager, it's sometimes with the hiring manager. Other times, if they've been successful in replicating their expectations, particularly if it's technical, we have, like, for example, for software engineers, we have our principal engineers do maybe some of the first round of screen, not just the hiring manager. Hiring manager always meets the candidate, but it may not be in the first round. But it's trying to get that mind meld figured out so that we can keep moving and keep the momentum going with regards to the recruiter's efforts.
Got it. Excellent. All right, Deborah, let's sort of jump it over to you. Thanks, Mark.
Everyone's had some really great ideas. Thank you for sharing them. So my name is Deborah Bamus. I'm the manager of talent acquisition at Era Technology. We are in the artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing space for supply chains. Global company, 400 people globally, growing like a weed. So it's pretty exciting all the time over here. I think everyone has had some really amazing ideas. I've learned a ton today. I will tell you that I also do kind of deep dives on our interview team. I was putting together a report yesterday on this one role that we've got globally and the interview team that we've got participating with for that role, and kind of sussing out interviewers, because that's really who's going to help make that decision, right? So I found that there's people that every single time are strong hire, And every single time, this other person is a strong no hire. And so then going back and reading, well, if you're always a no hire and you're always a yes hire, you're not really doing a great job of sussing out the candidate when you're interviewing 50 candidates over the course of a year, right? It's all the same. So really kind of looking at the interview team and who's more objective and who's asking the better questions, and really helping the hiring manager make a good decision, because that's what the interview team is all about, is helping that hiring manager make that decision, right? But I've learned a ton here today, and I would agree with a lot of what everyone is talking about, right? Because it goes beyond just that gut feeling that we sometimes have when it comes to a candidate.
Deborah, with the company in your position that's growing rapidly with a lot of net new hires, right? It's probably all about speed, but hey, we still want the right people. The quality is still there. Getting back to kind of the original, how this all started off with William around defining, the good decision, right? That quality of hire. How are you looking at quality of hire when you're in such a fast-paced environment, is to kind of determine, did we make the right decision? Because typically, from what I've seen, the vast majority of quality of hire is based on tenure, right? Are they here in a year? Are they here less than 90 days? How are you in your fast-moving environment? Is it kind of a tenure thing? Did we make the right hire? Or are you moving to like a performance, like the 9-box type of deal where you can kind of look at more performance-based versus tenure?
So after the hire, we're still working that out. We've got the 30, 60, 90 in the 1 year, but we're still building out how we want to actually look at quality of hire down the road after they're hired. That's something that our chief people officer and I are actively putting together a plan for that.
It's not easy, is it? It's not easy, is it?
No, it's not. It's not easy. Would you hire this person again? Are they an A, B, or C player? I'm of the mindset that it's not a bad idea to bring in B players, because it gives them runway and ramp to actually become an A player. Do we want to hire C and D players? No. But if we hire A players, we better have a plan in place for them to figure out where they're going to go, because they're not going to stay in a role very long. And we don't want them up and out of the company. We want them to move within the company. So we're in the process of kind of building out that plan right now.
I'm working on a project to trying to connect the dots from cradle to grave. Once you first start interviewing them, to hiring them, to the progression. One of the things I've sort of highlighted is that's kind of not easy to do, but you can do, is looking at termination reports. So when your HR most likely has your term report, whether it's 60, 30, 60, 90, or a year, looking at who's leaving and why. So if it's a voluntary leave, they're leaving on their own accord. That doesn't mean you had a bad hire. That just means something happened and they're leaving for another reason. It's a developer. I'm betting the odds are, hey, I'm getting more money at this other company. I kind of see that going on. But that's sort of what I'm looking at, is kind of, hey, if I can't find the true recipe for success, can I at least know what the red flags are? And that's where a term report, it whittles it down to not all your existing employees, but the ones that left. There's allows you to kind of zone in and find out, well, what happened there. Was it a bad hire, or was it, no, they found something better, or was it the team experience, where we get back to that hiring manager and their team, and they're managing their team with that piece of it.
Yeah, if anyone leaves within a year, we have a conversation about that. We go back and we read the interview feedback forms. We have the conversations about, did you see this coming? Did we know that this person was a flight risk? Were there signs there that we just missed? And sometimes there are, right? You're like, oh, I kind of had a feeling about that. And then other times it's totally left field if somebody leaves, or you end up, gosh forbid, terminating them, But we kind of do a postmortem and try to figure out what we can change and do better.
Who's in that conversation?
It's a few people. It's really a lot of people that touch that candidate at a higher level. It would be HR, it would be myself, hiring manager, the recruiter. What did we miss here?
So to the other panelists, do you do that? Have a less than 1 year term debrief, so to speak, or postmortem?
Absolutely. So typically we'll have the hiring manager, recruiting manager, and typically the VP who signs off on the offer within our team, just because we do want to understand, why is this person leaving? Is it truly because they found a better opportunity, and what prompted them to look, or did they just come along? I mean, that certainly happens. So, but again, I think this ties back to the metric of a quality hire. It's like, did we sell this position correctly to this candidate? So I think that's ultimately what we want to get out of it, or if there's any internal rumblings happening on the team as well.
Yeah, that's true. Did we sell the position correctly with what we wrote on paper and posted out into the world and talk to them about? Is that actually the job that they were doing? Or did they come in and we put them in something completely different that they weren't happy, which sometimes happens, right?
Absolutely.
Happens. Yeah.
Is Michael and Deborah the only company that does that? I've never seen a company do that. I think it's a great idea.
We incorporate it into our exit feedback, and so something that the HRBP collects, and then they partner with talent acquisition and the manager as far as approaching the backfill. What did we learn from that exit interview feedback? So it used to be something that was more in the span of control within talent acquisition, but over the years has kind of moved over to the HRBP side.
So because we're smaller, I think that we have I don't know that we have the bandwidth, but it's something that we do because we're smaller. We don't have any HRBPs yet. We will. And I'm sure that they'll take over part of this. But for right now, it's really what we need to do to build our company and to retain our employees and keep that quality of hire really high.
Actually, I would say you still have the focus. I say a lot of companies, because each hire, each departure has such impact that when you have less than 500 employees or less than 200 even, the impact is so much there. So I would say they still have the focus, versus when you get big, it's so much noise going on. You got to pick your battle, so to speak. Right. Hey, great conversation. We're coming up to an hour mark. I never want to go past an hour. Any final thoughts or comments around increasing your quality of hire? Any final thoughts? All good? All right, excellent. Thank you, everybody. Again, another great conversation. I thought that went really well, and I did not think we'd be going close up to the hour. William, thanks for hanging on there. I know you. All right, so thank you, everybody. I will talk to everybody soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.